Wednesday, July 10th. Today in Europe, the struggle for the mastery of the Mediterranean is underway. British and Italian naval units have clashed. The British say the Italians steamed away under a smokescreen and that their fleet took up pursuit. The Italians have just announced officially that their naval and air forces severely damaged a number of British warships. Now the news direct, Erlin and London. Afterwards, an analysis by Linton Wells from New York. First, the report from the German capital by Edwin Hartrich. Go ahead, Berlin.
Good morning. This is Berlin. Count Halicki, the Prime Minister of Hungary, and Count Czecki, the Foreign Affairs Minister, are to meet with Herr Hitler and Foreign Affairs Minister von Ribbentrop today at Munich. Count Schiano, the Italian Foreign Affairs Minister, is also expected to attend the parley. And from this conversation, the Hungarian leaders will be given some information as regards to what part that country is expected to play in the new Europe of Greater Germany. I've just returned from the French naval base at Toulon. There I learned some first-hand and interesting details about the British attack on the French fleet at Oran last week. This information came from a number of officers and sailors who had personally participated in the engagement. And here is what they had to say. The French squadron at Oran consists of 4 battleships: the Dunkirk, Strasbourg, Provence, and Bretagne, an aircraft carrier, 6 large destroyers, and numerous smaller craft and submarines. The 4 battleships and the aircraft carrier, La Teste, were tied up to the breakwater, which is about 3,000 feet long. The destroyers were anchored elsewhere in the harbor. At 9 o'clock last Wednesday morning, the British squadron was first sighted. It consisted of the battleships Hood, Resolute, and Valiant, plus the aircraft carrier Ark Royal, 1 heavy cruiser, and 4 destroyers, commanded by Sir James Somerville. Shortly afterwards, Captain Holland of the British Navy came over to the Dunkirk in a launch to deliver the British ultimatum. Following its receipt, the French Admiral Jean Stoul gave orders to his squadron to get ready for action. At 4:30 p.m., Captain Holland again arrived on the launch, this time to discover the French had refused to comply with the British demands. They were to surrender or scuttle the French ships or sail them to some distant neutral or French port, I was told by a French officer. Then the British squadron, according to this French version, took up a position about 11 miles to the northwest of the naval base. At 5:40 p.m., the British fired the first salvo. At first, the French did not believe the British were firing at their ships, they told me. They thought either a mine had exploded or they were being bombed from the air. The first salvo dropped right into the area where the 4 battleships were tied up. 3 shells scored direct hits on the Dunkirk, crippling its engines. Meanwhile, the commander of the Strasbourg gave orders to slash the cables. Within a few minutes, his ship was swinging away from the breakwater and heading for the open sea. The French ships had steam up, but some of their crews were not all assembled. The Bretagne was also struck by British shells. The Provence hit a mine dropped earlier by British planes from the Ark Royal. These 2 and the Dunkirk were knocked out of the fight. The French, however, fired back. The officers told me that one ship, probably the Strasbourg, scored 3 hits on the Hood. Strasbourg raced out of the harbor. It was followed by 5 destroyers: the Tiger, Volta, the Terrible, the Lynx, and the Kherson. Yesterday morning, I was able to inspect these ships in Toulon Harbor. There was no evidence of any damage suffered from the British. The French destroyer Mogador was another casualty in the short but swift action. The battle only lasted 10 minutes, I was informed by the French. The remainder of the French squadron started for Toulon, which they reached Thursday night. To their surprise, the British did not follow them. However, at 8:30 p.m., a squadron of British planes attempted to bomb and torpedo the Strasbourg, but without success. Then again that evening, and on Saturday, British planes attacked the Dunkirk at Oran. It was hit by a torpedo and is now almost beyond repair, I was told. According to the French officers, 1,000 men were killed on the Dunkirk on the first and subsequent attacks. Approximately another 200 men of the French squadron were killed in action, while another 200 were wounded. With noticeable bitterness, the officers and men at Toulon spoke of the last British plane attack on the wreck of the Dunkirk, when the remainder of the crew on deck at the time was a machine gun from the air. Incidentally, the harbor defenses at Oran had been dismantled, and thus the British were able to get away without any serious counterfire from the coastal batteries. The British lost 1 submarine sunk by the destroyer Kherson in action, while the French lost 3 battleships and 1 destroyer. And after a brief return to normal peacetime conditions following the armistice, Toulon is again blacked out at night. The ships in the harbor are ready for action, I was assured by an officer. This is Edwin Hartrich. I return you now to Columbia in New York.
This is New York, and Columbia's shortwave listening station has picked up a British radio news report that General Antonescu, the Romanian Iron Guard leader, has been arrested for trying to reconstitute the organization against King Carol's orders. But the report originating in Bucharest is said by the British radio to be unconfirmed. Now the news from the British capital, reported by Erlin Eckland. Go ahead, London.
This is London. Raiding units of the German Air Force are already over this country this morning. They are sprinkling coastal areas with bombs of all kinds in attempts to find military objectives. At one town in southwest England a few hours ago, incendiary and high explosive bombs were dropped and are reported to have done very considerable damage to the residential section. The report says it is feared that there have been many casualties. 2 of this morning's raiders are said to have been shot down, and 9 German machines are now reported to have been brought down yesterday. There is no further news of the British-Italian naval battle in the Mediterranean. The last report was that the Italians were fleeing behind a smokescreen, hotly pursued by the British. The Italian report of the encounter states that the British squadron proceeded in a southerly direction, pursued by Italian naval forces. London was astounded last night when it heard the first news over the 9 o'clock radio of the appointment of His Royal Highness the Duke of Windsor to be Governor and Commander-in-Chief of the Bahama Islands. This morning's newspapers front page the story with extensive descriptions of the 20 inhabited islands of the Duke's new domain. The former King Emperor will be Commander-in-Chief of about 70,000 people, 55,000 of whom are descendants of liberated African slaves. The only editorial comment I have found is in the Times, which says that the fortune of war has closed his job with the British Army, but another has been found in one of the oldest and most honorable of appointments under the Crown. Others, no doubt, rank higher in formal dignity and in the extent of the jurisdiction, but there is real work ahead of him, unquote. The salary of the new post at current exchange is from $10,000 to $12,000 a year. Well-wishers of the Duke feel that he will soon be at home in Nassau, capital of the islands, and believe that his American-born Duchess may have influenced him in his decision to take the job. They point out that the Duke's new capital is about a 15-minute seaplane ride from Miami Beach, Florida. It is reported this morning that the scheme for evacuating British children to the Dominions and the United States is in danger of being abandoned. Difficulties have arisen over the question of escorting vessels which would carry the children across the Atlantic. If the scheme is scrapped, as threatened, it will bring distress to many hearts here. In the last 2 weeks, the most elaborate arrangements have been made. Liners have been chartered, many thousands of children selected for evacuation, doctors, nurses, and welfare workers engaged, and complete arrangements are said to have been fixed at the American end. Many British parents would like to see their children sail in American ships under the security of the American flag, and some observers think this may be the British way of drawing attention to this point. The War Cabinet is discussing the existing plan this morning, and a full statement is expected to be issued later in the day. Emphasizing some of the dangers that these shiploads of children might be subjected to, London's Daily Mirror this morning suggests that in addition to German and Italian forces, the French submarine fleet is also in the Atlantic. The newspaper points out that the First Lord of the Admiralty, in yesterday's speech, kept strictly silent about France's submarines. In the last few weeks, there have been grave Allied losses off France, Britain, and Ireland. The newspaper asks, quote, "Whose submarines are sinking our ships? Where are France's submarines?" Unquote. British housewives looked with new interest at their kitchens this morning. For Lord Beaverbrook, Minister for Aircraft Production, has just asked them to hand over all their aluminum pots, pans, and cooking utensils. Also, their vacuum cleaners, hat pegs, coat hangers, shoe trees, bathroom fittings, cigarette boxes, ashtrays, and household ornaments. His Lordship says the need is instant. The call is urgent. Hand them over at once. We will turn your pots and pans into Spitfires and Hurricanes, Blenheims and Wellingtons, the famous fighting airplanes of the Royal Air Force. We return you now to Columbia in New York.
That was Erlin Eckland reporting from London. Now here in New York is Linton Wells with more news and his analysis of late developments. Mr. Wells.
The British Lion, judging by reports, is on the prowl, bent on vengeance for the vengeance. From Gibraltar to the eastern Mediterranean, it appears that the British fleet is maneuvering to come to grips again with the Italian fleet now that the French Navy has been effectively immobilized. As Erlin Eckland told us from London this morning, the British Admiralty says that the British squadron based on Alexandria clashed with Italian units, which laid down a smokescreen and fled after one Italian battleship was hit. Rome admits the loss of a destroyer, but says that Italian naval and air force units drove off this squadron after a 6.5-hour battle during which a number of British ships were badly damaged, and adds that Italian planes are being massed for a big-scale attack on the British fleet. However, reports from other sources would seem to indicate that English units from east, west, and south are now converging on an area east of the British Mediterranean island of Malta, off the southern tip of Italy, and that a great engagement between the two fleets is imminent. If so, then it may well be one of the decisive battles of the war, because mastery of the Mediterranean is certainly the aim of both opponents. The Third Republic, war-born grandchild of the French Revolution and last champion in continental Europe of liberty, equality, and fraternity, will die today at Vichy, France. Germany, responsible for the Third Republic's birth almost 70 years ago, is now the instrument of its death. 151 years ago next Sunday, on Bastille Day, the French Revolution began, inspired by Jean-Jacques Rousseau's proclamation that man is born free. Today, a corporate fascist state destroying the freedom of man is to be established in its place. The French Parliament will vote itself out of existence and give full power to Marshal Pétain, who will in effect become a dictator. The degree of his benevolence remains to be demonstrated, but certainly France has become a German vassal state. The Balkan situation continues to be rather obscure, although it would seem that Germany and Italy have begun direct action to clarify it before proceeding with the more important task of destroying the British Empire. As Mr. Edwin Hartrich told us from Berlin this morning, Hitler, Ribbentrop, and Ciano are at Munich to hold a surprise meeting with Hungarian delegates who undoubtedly are hoping to gain full access support of Hungary's claims to Romanian territory in Transylvania. Many observers believe that Hitler will tell the Hungarians to go home and be quiet, pending the end of hostilities, when the victors will give loyal supporters a small share in the spoils. The Romanians are still threatening to fight before yielding to Hungarian and Bulgarian demands, and the probability is that the Germans and Italians don't want to take any action on having a full-fledged war on their hands in the Balkans, thus jeopardizing sources of essential German war supplies. So Hungary probably is to be muzzled temporarily. However, Russia is reported to be continuing her efforts to get everything she can while the getting is easy. The Kremlin is understood to have demanded from Turkey joint control of the Dardanelles, which would protect Russia from future naval attacks from the Mediterranean area. The Turks have said repeatedly that despite their friendly alliance with Russia, they would never yield on this point, and today began mobilizing men from 19 to 38, in apparent warning to the Reds not to press their Dardanelles demands or penetrate too far into the Balkans. The Far Eastern situation is no less tense than that in Europe. From Tokyo comes reports that the Japanese War Minister, General Hatta, has decided to urge the cabinet to strengthen its ties with Germany and Italy and to withdraw from the government if this policy is not followed. That, of course, would mean a cabinet collapse. If this plan is carried out, it would seem to presage Japanese action to implement Foreign Minister Arita's recent enunciation of the Japanese Monroe Doctrine for the Orient and a warning to the United States not to interfere. And in Shanghai, Japanese extremists are threatening to disarm American Marines unless they apologize for arresting 16 Japanese gendarmes 2 days ago. Such drastic action is not likely to be taken, but such talk would seem to indicate that Japan is endeavoring to build up an excuse to move against the United States as well as the French, British, and Dutch and force them out of the Far Eastern picture. And from Mexico City comes unofficial returns in Sunday's presidential election, giving General Camacho, the government party candidate, a 3-1 majority over General Almazan.
And with this is an analysis from New York, we conclude this morning's report of European developments. We heard from Berlin and from London. This is the Columbia Broadcasting System.